Let's begin by looking at the purpose of today's workshop. First of all, to learn about your end-of-life choices. What are they? There's a lot of them. Secondly, to learn how to communicate your wishes, your end-of-life wishes, to your family and to your doctor. And third, to learn how to create your own advance directives. An advance directive is a term that is used to describe a document that comes into play when you can no longer speak for yourself. And it has other names like living will and durable power of healthcare and healthcare directive, but we'll call it the advance directive for today. Some of you really don't know much about who Compassion and Choices is. You've just, sort of read it as the sponsor. I've had conversations with several of you that say, well, who are you guys? So let me tell you a little bit about the mission of Compassion and Choices. First of all, we are here to promote excellent end-of-life care and expanded choices at the end of life. We advocate for you to have a humane and peaceful death. Compassion and Choices of Washington is the organization that put together the coalition that passed the Death with Dignity law that passed in our state in 2008. We educate people about all their end-of-life options and help them deal with their end-of-life issues. Secondly, we help them in preparation of their advance directives, and that's one of the things that we'll do together today. Most importantly, we provide free client support services to help people understand what all their end-of-life choices are and support them through the dying process. And more in a little bit about what all those choices might be. And lastly, we help people who want to use the Death with Dignity law. There's a lot of misconceptions about this law. People think that when it was passed, they could then go to their doctor and demand that their doctor support them in using it. But actually, the way the law was written, any physician and even whole health care systems can opt out. And systems such as Franciscan Peace Health and Providence have prohibited their doctors or restricted their doctors from participating. So sometimes it is hard for a client who wants to use the law to find an appropriate doctor and maybe even get any kind of information. So Compassion and Choices can help. We have dedicated, well-trained volunteers all over the state who can help you wend your way through the system and advocate for the people indeed that we assist. Lots of information for you today. You're going to walk out of here, kind of like drinking from the proverbial fire hose. There's lots of information in your packet. There'll be lots of information coming from myself and Judy in a little bit. And we're going to finish my portion with a short video about what Death with Dignity is. So let's get started by looking at the material on the left-hand pocket of your packet, and it says, Talking to Your Family About Dying. It's a wonderful article. I'm going to say, don't resist the temptation to pull it out and start reading it, because I really want to say some things about it that'll lose you if you're reading the fine print. So stay with me. Just know that's a fabulous article. You're going to want to read every word of it later. So let's talk about what's important about talking to your family about dying. And I'm going to say to you that long before your death, of course, you need to be talking to your family about your wishes. And our adult children don't want to talk about it. You notice that? You try and bring it up with your daughter and she says, oh Mom, you're going to live forever. And your grown son says, oh, I don't want to deal with that until it's necessary. And all of those have the effect of shutting down the discussion, don't they? So we don't want it to be like Winston Churchill, who reportedly had his end-of-life documents in a manila file folder in the back of his desk drawer labeled Operation Hope Not. Didn't happen that way, did it? You really need to get across to your family members, even those younger adult children of yours, that any of us, no matter what age we are, can have an accident or an unexpected medical situation, and it's simply important to be prepared. And what we're going to say is you ought to be using your advance directive to start the conversation. So after today, when you've done all this thinking about it, and perhaps even finished your advance directive, you can call your family together and have a meeting. Maybe the holidays are coming up. This is perfect. Thanksgiving, Christmas. Got y'all here. And have a discussion, and start the discussion by just simply saying, I've completed my advance directive and I want to discuss it with you, and I want to tell you what my choices are, and I want you to support me in them. And there's real value in getting all the family members around the table at once, hearing what you say and looking for those nods. Okay, Mom. Yeah, okay. We're behind you. Because years from now, when that document has to become active because something's happened to you, and the one daughter that was kind of the free spirit says to the rest of the siblings, you know, when we talked to Mom about this 4 years ago, I never liked that thing that she said about not wanting to do blah, blah, blah. And the rest of the siblings can say, wait a minute, you had a chance at that time to bring that up. And it's no longer possible because she's not here. So we got to support Mother. Now, it's not enough just to make advance directives. I bet a lot of you have them. But what is important is you got to let people know you have them. You got to make sure they're in the hands of the people that are affected by them. You got to make sure people understand why you made the decisions that you made, so that it is more likely that your choices will be honored at the end of life. So I'm just going to give you a little hint. If it's only in your safe deposit box, you're in trouble. We'll talk more about that later. The goal simply is to make sure everybody that's going to be impacted by your advance directive knows what's in it. Sometimes you have to have kind of a stealth conversation. If you can't get to your family members in a group and you're struggling with even a one-on-one conversation because you get the pushback, Mom, no Mom, you're going to live forever. Sometimes you have to kind of sneak up on them. Most of us know someone who's in failing health or at the end of life. Most of us know somebody. Or perhaps we know someone who made some choices at the end of their life that resulted in ruining their quality of life at the end. They made some choices, just didn't turn out well. In other words, they didn't have a good death. Maybe many of you remember Terry Schiavo. Who remembers Terry Schiavo? Okay. She was 37 years old. And she'd been in a persistent vegetative state in 2005, went for 15 years. 15 years. And if you remember, her husband and her parents were fighting over whether to let her go. Went to the Supreme Court. Almost none of us would want to be kept alive in that kind of a situation. So here's some things we could say. This is stealthy, weaving it into a conversation when those kinds of situations come on the news. And you might say something like, boy, if I were in that situation, I would not want my life to be prolonged. Or, boy, if I ever end up in that condition, I would not want to be held on life support. Do you hear me? No life support, you repeat. Or maybe you say, I would never want my family torn apart due to disagreements over my end of life. Now, after we've had that conversation with our family and we feel they understand our wishes, it's very important to talk to our doctor. And again, you have a fabulous little handout in there. Just kind of flick to see that it's there. Oh yes, there it is right there. And then stay with me because I want to talk about the highlights. We have to have this end-of-life conversation with our physician. We need to give our physicians permission to speak honestly and openly about our end-of-life prognosis and the conditions so that we can make informed choices about what kind of treatment or path to follow. You know, doctors in the past tended to be very paternalistic in the way they treated patients. We know, we will tell you, and you do it. We know best. And then as younger people got into medical school and they realized that really wasn't the way they wanted to practice medicine, we had informative doctors who said, here's the facts and figures, now you decide. And that really wasn't as good as we needed either. What we need is a doctor who's sort of interpretive. In other words, the doctor's role then is to help the patient determine what their end-of-life needs are, and then suggest a course of treatment that supports those. Doesn't that sound interesting? Sort of interpretive of the facts and figures, and a bit of advice with compassion thrown in there. What we're seeing is a little bit of that, but we're not seeing enough. And until we have that kind of doctor, we sort of imagine that we can wait until the doctors tell us there's nothing more that they can do. But rarely does a doctor say there's nothing more that we can do. They always got something in their back pocket to do. So let's look at why it's so difficult to have these conversations with our doctor. First of all, we are a very youth-oriented, very vitality-oriented culture. You know, 60's the new 90, and you know, so on and so forth. 100 years ago, life expectancy was only 45 years. Everything happened at home. You know, people were born at home, people died at home, and people either died from an accident or an infection, and they didn't have these long, drawn-out conditions that we have today. And so people rarely died in an institution. Now, the reverse of that is true now. Most people die in an institution. And so in our society, we have sort of a conspiracy of silence about the dying process. Very few of us have attended a death. Very few of us know what that dying process looks like. Doctors don't even want to bring this up, because they don't know if the patients are ready to sort of hear what's really going on. They don't want their patients to think they've given up on the patient. They don't want their patient to think there's no hope. We sort of don't want to bring it up because we don't want to have our doctor think we don't have faith in them, and that we don't trust them, and that we've given up hope. And so therefore, these discussions about end of life only occur at the very itty-bitty end of life, if at all. And this can result in a lot of not so good things. Continuing futile treatments, painful treatments, delaying referral to hospice, which in turn can lead to some unnecessary suffering that impacts the quality we have at the end of their life. So let's look at a way we could have a conversation with our doctor. First of all, we need to be the ones to start the conversation, because they're not going to. Dr. Atul Gawande, author of the book Being Mortal, said, "In a war you cannot win, you don't want a general who fights to the point of total annihilation. You don't want Custer. You want Robert E. Lee, someone who knows how to fight for territory that can be won and how to surrender when it can't. Someone who understands that the damage is greatest if all you do is battle to the bitter end." Isn't that interesting? Not Custer, but Robert E. Lee. Sort of an interesting analogy. So you could start your conversation with your doctor like this: "Doc, I've had a good life. Thank you for your part in it. I'm ready to accept death when it comes. It's really important to me that you speak honestly and openly about my diagnosis, because now I'm more interested in quality than quantity of life. This gives your physician permission to speak to you frankly about your health condition, your prognosis, and your alternatives for treatment. And you want to not only get information, but also interpretation. What does a given prognosis mean through the course of this illness, disease? And what is a good way we can get that kind of information that is not only factual, but also compassionate in its advice to us about which fork in the road to take? And we've got a couple of examples of how you can do that with your doctor. So 2 important questions for your doctor. Because doctors are often reluctant to tell us what to do. That's why you get those, that I got the information, now you decide. Here's what I've found. The older I've gotten, the younger the docs get. Anybody else feel that way? I got Doogie Howser for doc, you know? I have doctors who are now the age of my children. So I've actually used these following statements recently on a couple of my doctors. What would you do if you were in my shoes? In other words, you're asking them for the empathy to be able to say, if you were facing what I'm facing, what would you do? And this one, this is the one I use on Doogie Howser. If your mother were diagnosed with what I've got, if your father were diagnosed with what I have, what would you recommend? See, it's a side way of getting your doctor to say, what do you think? What should I do? Getting information from your specialist is incredibly difficult. 40% of oncologists admit to offering treatments they believe are unlikely to work. There was a study of lung cancer patients who were put into 2 groups. One was given aggressive chemotherapy, radiation, etc. The other was given palliative and hospice care. Guess which group lived the longest? It's true. The palliative care lived longer, and not only did the patients have a better death, but their family had more peace of mind in the palliative care hospice situation. Tell your physician you want to understand your condition and that you wish to avoid any treatments that are designed to prolong your life, if in doing so increases your suffering and ruins your remaining quality of life. Now, another way to do this is to write your physician a letter with all of these things in it, and it's in the medical record. Now, I want to make a note here. There may be some of you sitting out there that are saying, darn it, I want to fight to the bitter end. I want Custer. I want every possible treatment given. I'm going to go down swinging. To my dying breath, I want him doing stuff. You don't have to do anything, because that's what the medical model does. You don't have to make any special provision, because that's what they do. To the dying breath, they're going to be thinking, oh, let's try this. So you don't need to worry. So in summary, folks, ask a lot of questions. Ask a lot of questions of your doctor. Give your physician permission to speak honestly with you about your end-of-life issues, and make sure your physician understands your end-of-life choices.
What if you just give the post agreement in the healthcare record?
It's not enough. Well, you got to talk about other things around the end of life.
Just start the conversation.
Sure, that's a good start. Just like we say, giving your advance directive to your children starts the conversation. A Poltz form can start a conversation with your doctor. Sure. We're going to learn more about that in a little bit. Let's look at some of those other end-of-life choices. In your left-hand packet, you have this wonderful little handout. Again, just kind of note that it's there. The importance of hospice. And let's talk about hospice. How many of you visualize dying in a hospital bed as your first choice of how to die? In a hospital bed, where you're looking through your toes at a whiteboard that's got your nurse's name on it, your CNA, a smiley face. Out the window is the air conditioning unit on the wing of the hospital adjoining yours. Whew, that's my kind of an idea. Way to go. How many of you dream of being in your home with your select number bed, your Tempur-Pedic mattress, your blankie, your scented candles, your digital picture frame on your nightstand where your grandkids' pictures are cycling through. Is it my idea? Well, one of the keys to being able to do that is hospice. One of the keys to staying at home is hospice, which allows you to stay in control, because you know when you're in a hospital or a skilled nursing facility, you got very little say in what happens when. But you do when you're at home, and hospice can help make sure that happens. You know, the three biggest fears people have about hospice, three biggest fears people have about dying. They're afraid to die in pain, they're afraid to die alone, and they're afraid to die in some sort of an institution. And hospice can just make sure none of those fears happen. The second idea about hospice is it's not really a place per se, but it's a kind of care. We do have some freestanding hospice facilities on this side of the pond, but mostly hospice is done in the patient's home, supported very much by the family. It doesn't hinder or hasten death. Nothing about hospice helps you die earlier or keeps you from dying naturally. It doesn't happen. It's usually covered by Medicare, Medicaid, or private insurance. If you qualify for Part A Medicare, you have the hospice Medicare benefit. And you simply must be told that you have a life expectancy of 6 months or less to live if the course of your illness runs its natural course. Now, what does hospice do? Oodles, just oodles. First of all, pain and symptom management under the direction of a medical director who is specially trained in palliative and hospice care. Secondly, all the medications pertaining to your terminal illness at no charge to you. Third, home visits by RNs who are also highly trained in palliative care. They can come and take your vital signs once or twice a week, adjust your medications, what do you need, what can we do for you. Scheduled intermittent personal care by angels called certified nursing assistants who swoop into your house, help your loved one shower, bathe, shave, whatever, and give you, the caregiver, some break. Fabulous. Angels. Social worker and chaplain to help with the psychosocial issues and the spiritual challenges of facing a terminal illness. Also, comprehensive bereavement support for 13 months following the death of a loved one. Interesting, 13 months. Has to cover not only the anniversary, but the few weeks afterwards where a lot of memories get sort of churned up. Isn't that nice? 13 months. Medical equipment and supplies. That's your hospital bed placed in your living room overlooking the sound. That's your portable commode, your walker, your wheelchair, your incontinence supplies, everything, no cost to you. Respite care for caregivers. One of the most exhausting things I ever did in my life was take care of my dad the last 4 months he lived. It was exhausting. Respite care. They come in, give you a break, you can leave, you go rest, you go have your pedicure, whatever. Fabulous. And then if this isn't great enough, 24/7 on-call service. Name me another company like that that'll do that. So you have breakthrough pain in the middle of the night, 2 o'clock, you call, an RN will be in your house in 30 minutes. And then they at the time of death, they take care of calling, you know, the coroner and making arrangements for the funeral home, etc., etc. What's not to like? When I worked in hospice, we like to say we're going to give this patient a good ride out. A good ride out. They're fabulous. They're fabulous. Let's look at other end-of-life options. Voluntarily stopping eating and drinking. We use the acronym VSAID. This is voluntarily refusing to eat food or take in liquids with the understanding that this will hasten your death. One of my clients died last Monday from this. Chose to do this. It's not a painful way to go. We, as the onlookers, equate food with life, and we say, they just eat, I know they feel better. When our dad was failing, we just obsessed every tablespoon of chocolate pudding we could get in his mouth, and we measured it and wrote it down. Because we just knew if he ate, he'd feel better. No, his body was shutting down. There was no place for the food to go. It's painful to eat in those last few weeks. So this really isn't an unusual way to go, and it's not painful. And what we recommend is that you have support of hospice for symptom control, like restlessness and dry mouth, etc. Another one is stopping treatment. Stopping treatment such as dialysis. We always used to say in hospice that if you had end-stage renal failure and you were on dialysis, you got the golden ticket out. Because all you need to do is say, I'm through with dialysis. And again, with hospice support to manage symptoms, it's a pretty peaceful way to go. Another one is just not starting some sort of a treatment. An aggressive chemotherapy or even a palliative chemotherapy can sometimes be very distressful. And sometimes people will say, if mother gets pneumonia, we're not treating it. And that's, a friend at the end of life. So you can make those kinds of decisions. And then lastly, let me tell you about the Death with Dignity Act. Again, you have a fabulous handout, everything you want to know about it. And just stay with me and let's talk about the Death with Dignity. It was passed by Initiative 1000 in 2008. How many of you remember voting on it, yay or nay? Okay, talking on the corner here. 60% of the voters in this state passed it. It passed in 30 of our 39 counties. The truth is doctors have been helping people who are near the end of life for years and years and years. They just did it very discreetly. Perhaps they wrote a prescription for some symptom management that, if misused, could lead to death. And no physician was ever prosecuted for a patient misusing an appropriate prescription written for that person. Before I talk about what the law does and what it is and how it works, let's talk about what it isn't. And I'm going to ask you all here, to the degree that those of you who are supporters here, please help us with the terminology in talking about this. It's in the news. Have you noticed the Brittany Maynard story? You've been watching that on the news? Brittany Maynard is 29 years old with a glioblastoma, stage 4 brain tumor, who was given 6 months to live earlier this year and decided to move from California to Oregon because it's not legal to use the law. She moved to Oregon and contacted Compassionate Choices and said, I don't want to live out the natural consequences of this kind of brain tumor. And if anyone of you have had experience with someone that you know, it's a horrible, horrible, horrible end. So she's been on the news and she's been on Facebook and so on, and she said, I'm going to end my life November 1st. Except she came on Facebook 2 days ago and said, I'm still feeling good. I'm probably not going to do it on November 1st. I'm going to wait till I don't feel good, which is her right, isn't it? So we're getting a lot of press, but the antis, the people who are real bothered by this, are using kind of scare tactics terminology. Please help us get the word out to speak about what we do properly. First of all, death with dignity is not euthanasia. Euthanasia is a death in which a physician or someone else administers personally a lethal dose of something. So think of Kurt Kevorkian. Voluntary euthanasia is what we're talking about. Involuntary euthanasia is capital punishment, because there is no okay given, isn't it? We're not talking about euthanasia, and yet you hear it talked about by the people who are afraid of what we're doing in the antis. And it is also not assisted suicide, which is still illegal in the state of Washington and is a Class C felony. This is the term used by opponents of this law to scare people. Assisted suicide implies, suicide implies an often irrational, violent act by someone who may or may not be depressed, but who has an open-ended opportunity not to die. Do you hear why I'm saying that? They could actually live if they chose not to kill themselves. They have a life in front of them. But you see, somebody who is eligible to use our law does not have that choice. So it is not a choice between life and death. You need to hear this real carefully. People who choose to use this law have a terminal illness that is going to kill them anyway. What they want is the autonomy to choose how, where, and when. So here's what we want you to use when you talk to people about it, and correct them if they use the wrong terminology, is aid in dying. Aid in dying or physician-assisted dying. Not suicide, not euthanasia. It's a choice between suffering and being able to say enough is enough. Enough is enough. It is aid in dying, and it is physician-assisted because the physician must write a prescription to the client for life-ending medication, which the client must be able to administer him or herself at the time of his or her choosing, or not. Or not. So how does the law work? First of all, only mentally competent people can use the law. They must be capable of making an informed decision, not impaired by mental illness, dementia, or depression. This is sadly why people with Alzheimer's disease cannot use the law. Because by the time Alzheimer's is considered terminal because of other underlying conditions, they've lost the ability to clearly make an informed choice. But this is what the antis are scaring us about. They say, oh, first it'll be our, our mentally handicapped friends and brothers and sisters, and there'll be old people that we're doing this to, and people we just don't want, all the fringes of society. There are so many little hoops to jump to get through this. There's no way. There's no way it's being abused. Must be diagnosed. You must have that life expectancy of 6 months or less. Interestingly enough, same as hospice, for the same reasons. Must be a resident of the state of Washington and over the age of 18. Must have the support of 2 physicians. One of them is called the attending physician, and this is the physician who says, I'm willing to write the prescription. And the other one is the consulting or confirming physician. So it's 2 doctors that have to agree on this. Doctors are pretty independent-minded, so they're not going to be talked into anything. And as I mentioned, the patient must be able to self-administer the medication or not. Our client support volunteers are available to help people through this process. This is what I do, working for Compassion and Choices, and I've done for the last two years. So Beth calls me and she says, I've got a client over in Port Townsend. Do you want to take that client? And I say, absolutely. And then I go and I talk to them and I find out what they want. What are their needs? What do they want at the end of life? What are their expectations? And then I work them through the process so that they get the confirming and attending physicians' paperwork done, and medication, etc. And then often I'm privileged to be there at the end. Privileged.
What if you're a resident of Washington, but you're in bad shape somewhere else?
Say that again. I didn't understand.
Let's say you're near death, but you're going to decide to go to the Grand Canyon like that woman is doing.
Like Thelma Louise?
Yeah.
The Grand Canyon? He's saying, what if you're really bad off, but you decide to go to the Grand Canyon?
Well, like the lady that's 29. She's been to the Grand Canyon. Just the last 3 months.
Yeah.
So let's say you want to see the canyon for the last time.
Well, she did, in fact.
I know, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But I'm there now. And
Yeah.
I'm end of life. Can I be handled?
Yes, he's saying, what if I'm a resident of the state of Washington and I've obtained the medication? I'm assuming that's what your thought process is. Can I take it out of state and use it? Catherine? I don't know that we've faced that, have we?
I think we don't encourage it because they can't have one of our volunteers, such as yourself.
Right.
And if something goes wrong, we can't be responsible.
Yeah, I think that's the answer. You don't want to do this on your own by yourself. And it would be tricky in a state not supporting this law to have anyone else involved. That makes sense? I see another hand up? Okay, let's just summarize by talking about what compassionate choices is again, and then I'm going to show you a little video. So first of all, we're not just death with dignity. We're not just death with dignity. We're here to help you have a humane, peaceful death, however you want to do it. Hospice, palliative care, etc. And we have no agenda except to help you understand what your choices are at the end of life. And we're here to support you.